All right. Hello and welcome to Demystifying AI for Business. This session is part of the 2025 Rising Economy Conference, an immersive virtual and in-person event hosted by the South Island Prosperity Partnership. My name is John MacDonald. I'm the owner of the Business Examiner News Group, and this is our second year of sponsoring the event. We love the SIPP, or the South Island Prosperity Partnership. With this event in particular, the conversations that it generates provide a lot of value to the region and some real big picture thinking. We also greatly appreciate that they take the time to put the event on because it drives relationships and ultimately economic development for the area. So the format for this evening, I'll go over this here in a moment. I'll turn things over to our speaker. But I'll just give you the brief structure here. So about halfway through the conversation, we'll be taking your questions for our speakers. You can submit a question at any time through the Zoom Q&A below this video. The session is being recorded, and you can submit your questions anonymously if you prefer. To interact with attendees, you can use the Zoom or Whova chat. The production team will monitor the Whova chat and Q&A for those joining us through the app. Finally, if you are posting your takeaways to social media, please use the hashtag Rising Economy Week 2025. So I'm going to introduce our moderator now. William Johnson is a writer, media entrepreneur, and advisor based in Vancouver. For over a decade, he's been telling stories about great tech startups, entrepreneurs, and digital culture, with bylines in the Globe and Mail, Maclean's, Billboard, and the Georgia Strait. In 2018, he founded Vancouver Tech Journal, growing it from a small newsletter into the city's largest tech publication, now expanded to Victoria and Calgary. Through his work, William continues to explore the people and ideas shaping our world, sharing their stories with a broad and engaged audience. He blogs about work and life at williamjohnson.ca. Here's William.
Thanks so much, John, for that wonderful introduction, and welcome everyone to Demystifying AI for Business. What a hot topic and an especially relevant one to be talking about today and this week at Rising Economy Week. I'm really excited to introduce our speaker for today and the expert that we have on, Elka Dunnette. Elka is a modern workplace leader based in Calgary with M&P Digital, and she's an expert in technologies that innovate on end-user experiences and enhance workplace collaboration and efficiency. Primary focus of hers is to ensure that technology serves as an asset instead of a barrier, making sure we can really leverage technology. And it's something that, we're not afraid of, but we're using it as a tool to help, people and organizations to achieve more in work and in life. Her career spans various industries, which has helped her bring wealth of knowledge and unique perspective to all the projects that she works on. She's a Microsoft alum, and she's served as in the executive leadership on multiple technology-based not-for-profit boards. She's also contributed as a judge for the inaugural Global UC Leaders Awards 2024. Elka is passionate about empowering organizations through technology and is dedicated to fostering a culture of continuous improvement and innovation. Elka, welcome. It is great to have you here.
Thank you so much, William, and thank you, John, as well. Very excited to be here today.
So today we're talking about artificial intelligence, demystifying it for business leaders and organizations of all shapes and sizes. I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs and innovators, day to day, and the thing that comes up a lot is when we're talking about AI, I feel like we need to sort of define what we're talking about when we say AI, right? Is it spell check? Is it my calculator? Is it ChatGPT? Is it a radiologist that is using computer vision to identify issues in health? What is AI, or how do you define it, and how has that evolved over the years?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, and it really is most of the above. AI as well, like when we look at the real definition of artificial intelligence, it's really that science that seeks to replicate intelligence. And it's actually been around for quite a while. It's not necessarily new. There's early evidence to show that there was models being created back in the 50s. And then you also heard or seen things like machine learning, for example, where it was starting to create more of those models and using data to make different decisions and predictions. And then kind of coming into that deep learning layer with neural networks. I don't know, I don't want to go too technical and whatnot, but some of these examples over the probably, let's say 70s, 80s, and 90s, you think of things even like weather and weather prediction, for example, would be something that's relatable to us. And now we're coming into the era of generative AI, and really what we're seeing is the democratization of these assets being available now to an average consumer. And so it's available, it's easier to use, and the resources that are available to us to be able to build on top of these models is just becoming a lot better to work with. And so it's not just necessarily one thing. There's many different types of it as well. So for example, like you mentioned about on your cell phone, like there's image recognition. There's things like speech recognition, like the recordings that we're doing in our meetings nowadays, and being able to translate that and get context. Chat bots, for example, we've seen those around for a long time. But what's happening now is they're getting more intuitive. It's harder to tell whether or not you're speaking with a bot or a human, and that's part of that natural language development. Even sentiment analysis, being able to see, is our conversations going well? What are key language and markers that are indicating it's a positive interaction or negative, and continuing to train and build on those interactions. So there's lots of different ways that AI is classified nowadays.
Yeah, no, it's really fascinating. And you mentioned something specifically, generative AI, and I want to just pull on that thread a bit. Is generative AI what has got everyone excited about AI now? Why is AI so important or relevant at this moment? Clearly, ChatGPT and related technologies have had some impact, but perhaps it's not just about the technology. Are there other things happening on a macro level in the world which is making AI particularly important at this moment?
That's a fantastic question, especially considering our conference theme. It really is about, in a way, upping the game of availability of resources. How are you able to almost now look at being more competitive because you're able to have this expanded, almost like you think of the encyclopedia days, right? So being able to consume more knowledge, be able to get different perspectives, and using AI to help challenge either existing thinking or the creative thought processes. So it's really almost coming from a place of trying to solve things like productivity crisis right now, how to do more with less, how to think differently, how to remain competitive and be able to scale. And so those are some of the common challenges that we're seeing in business today in Canada, where AI is being employed to help with those.
Yeah, so it really is about allowing humans, workers, to achieve more in their day-to-day, right? There's always a big conversation around, oh, is AI replacing people? And from what I've seen, it's mostly organizations are harnessing the power of AI tools to just get more out of their employees' productivity, like as you mentioned. On that note, how are you seeing clients use these tools right now? Or what's a better way of putting this? Actually, is 90% of the businesses you work with already using these tools and they're just not sure how to use them? What's penetration like, whether it's through M&P research or through your clients? To what degree are organizations actually using these tools?
It's an extremely wide range, and as it should be. I mean, there's going to be organizations that are a lot more cautious. And then there's going to be some that are just diving in. Maybe they've tested things at home. They want to be able to replicate that productivity internally. But it really should be considered more of a strategic approach, not just about a new shiny tech. And what I mean by a strategic approach is it's understanding, what are you intending to do with AI? Why do you even think you need AI at the end of the day? And then working to actually embed that as part of the organization as an asset. How are you going to measure that? How are you going to ensure proper controls and privacy, and making sure that you're using it in a way that's going to give you relevant output? So it's kind of a broad question, because it really depends on where clients are wanting to actually see it as a strategy. With that said, like it's definitely hasn't been something where I've seen a specific industry pick up way more than others. If anything, I've surprisingly have seen more financial institutions and insurance actually looking into it, because there's so many processes that they know can really help with that automation and increasing the customer service experience. But I wouldn't say there's any one particular leading industry. There really is a lot of fit, whether it's from back offices processes, even to frontline, helping them to get, through standard operating procedures easier, or whatever kind of content, being able to consume that and make it very relevant. So I think it's more about recognizing what you intend to do with it, what's the hypothesis you're looking to solve, and then employing AI strategy.
Mm-hmm. And then you certainly talk to a lot of different individuals about this. What do you think the biggest barrier to adoption is? Is it fear? Is it just lack of understanding? Is it privacy? What are you hearing?
Yeah, it's really around the responsible AI would probably be that leading topic. And when I say responsible AI, that's everything from privacy concerns, what's happening with my data, who can see what data I have or what I'm interacting with the model. Where is that data going? Is it being trained on, for example? Are these new models that are becoming available using my information to train themselves? What even from a sustainability perspective, I've heard conversations about what is the impact from using all these AI models. We know they're resource intensive. So I think probably around the responsible AI is probably the hottest topic. And also it is one that you should be leading with, because they're the right questions to be asking. You need, at the end of the day, it's really about data ownership, and a responsible use of that, which you as a business owner are ultimately accountable for. And then being able to understand and reflect that transparently back, not only to your staff, but to your clients and et cetera, what you are doing with that data and information.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I'll just note for the folks watching, I saw a question come in, and we're going to get to the Q&A. Really excited for that. So don't hesitate to drop questions in there. We're going to get to all the questions. And so, Elka, I'm thinking about, I'm a business owner, and I'm thinking about, how do I use this tool and be responsible with it? Do you, or does M&P have any sort of markers or criteria or key pillars of like what success is like as you're adopting these tools? Is there a framework or a set of questions, for example, that business owners can ask themselves? How do you think about
Absolutely. And there's a lot of considerations as you're assessing different technologies or models. And this comes in the form of the fact that there is going to be so much of it coming from vendors that you're probably working with today. If not already having vendors come to you and say, oh, we've created an AI product, come take a look. And so when you're looking to start understand how to assess this, you really want to understand and look at, what's the type of model, what is it known for? Are they approaching you with something that's maybe industry specific because they've trained their models to interact with certain types of data and to give you certain outputs? Or is it more intended for general productivity, like we see with the Microsoft Copilot stack, for example, where you're interacting with maybe Microsoft Office up to 80% of your day, and it knows a lot about how you're working and wants to help you in that day-to-day. Another consideration is really around the security. So as we mentioned, understanding what is that model or that AI doing with your data? Where does it flow to? Can you have data residency? Is it being used to train your model, the model that you're interacting with, for example? And then from a financial perspective, you really want to start to understand and be able to measure what your return on investment is. And this comes in a couple of different ways, depending on what kind of AI you're using. So for example, we're seeing right now that there's regular updates being introduced into the model types, new features coming out. We look at GPT, for example, we started 3, 3.0, 4, 4.5, etc. And so understanding that each of those will have different price points for what you're using. And for you in assessing that, it's to understand what do those different models offer and being able to correctly correlate that to what you actually need so that you're only investing in what you need, not necessarily whatever the newest model type may be. Or even kind of looking in more of the SaaS models where it's something like Microsoft Copilot, you have your standard per user per month rate. But how are you measuring that? How are you looking to understand what the productivity gains actually are from those activities? And so it's not just you try and plug it in for a couple of months, test it out and see it, but how is it from a change management perspective? Again, coming back to the strategy of how you see this asset being embedded into the organization, how are we going to measure that? Is it you're getting time back from your workers? Even more so, as opposed to just the time back, as opposed to saving time here and there, we're actually looking to try and measure with our clients' outputs. Outputs in, are you able to achieve more turnarounds in contracts, for example, fewer incidents in XYZ? Are you able to increase the amount of output in terms of reports, for example? So really trying to identify what it is that you're trying to solve, and then directly correlate to what is the measurement that you'll be able to correlate to the value of that product or service you're leveraging.
Mm-hmm. And so obviously, if M&P is working with a company, you're talking to them about their problems and their challenges, and then you guys, I'm sure, have a slate of different tools that you can talk to them about. What if I'm, executive director of a not-for-profit, and I don't work with M&P. Are there tools, are there places I can go and look and just like understand resources for how am I going to implement this stuff, right? Just on a practical level, because I know we have a lot of not-for-profit leaders on this call, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there is a ton of information out there. And that's also part of the overwhelming part of it, is that where do you even start? And so that's where we often recommend with even nonprofits that we work with that start with that almost hypothesis theory, right? What do you understand about AI today? What don't you know about AI today? What do you think it could do? Because when you're just trying to search about AI, there's so much out there, right? There's things to help you with your video recording for meeting transcripts. There's free AI, obviously, with ChatGPT. But then again, you're wanting to understand, well, what does this mean for my business? Do I understand enough about the security implications, about what's being used? And so, especially for nonprofits, understanding that budgets are a lot tighter and you want to be more fiscally responsible. I also recommend looking into things like TechSoup if you're not already registered for that. That helps with nonprofit organizations to be able to get access to licensing at a discounted rate. And there are some providers in there that have actually put in the licensing to their products. So just trying to look for those kind of nonprofit friendly opportunities as well. But the other thing I recommend, coming back to measuring, is thinking about those use cases, because it may not necessarily be that you need to procure for everyone in the organization at a point in time. Maybe start with a couple of folks that work together on a certain process, validate that it's going to actually give you the value you need, so that then you can use that budget and reallocate that to additional licensing that you may require. But it is one of those things where there's lots of leading vendors that are putting information out there, whether it's ChatGPT, Amazon and Google have theirs, Microsoft obviously has theirs as well. They're really good about trying to inform the public about what they're intended to provide to consumers.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned, I just want to repeat that for listeners, is it TechSoup?
TechSoup, yes.
And that's a resource that not-for-profits can tap into to potentially get software tools.
Absolutely. Yes. So that'll provide them basically you're proving that you have that charitable status associated with the organization, and then they have discounted licenses available from a plethora of different vendors, not just for AI, but for different types of licensing structures as well.
Fantastic. I'm wondering again for the viewers, you probably can't name specific clients, but can you take us through a client success AI story?
Yeah, I mean, one, for example, MNP, right? We can love talking about our own journey here. MNP, we're a Canadian-based organization. Our core, we have as part of our accounting, but we also have other professional services such as digital. And for us, we're obviously highly in tune to make sure that we are respectful of the fact that we're handling confidential data. So that was always one thing where we wanted to be very, very mindful looking into any AI, that we understand what it is that is happening with that data. Is it appropriate? Is it in line to the privacy policies that we have with our clients? And so for us, starting to look and understand, for example, what makes sense? What are we trying to solve for? Within the digital team, as we were working in our team, and on that's kind of the use case I'll focus on, is to understand what's our day-to-day experiences like. What are we doing in our meetings? What are we doing in preparing presentations and materials? And is there things where we do have, to your point of before, a common approach, where instead of having to, reinvent that or rebring it in each time, can we leverage things like Copilot, for example, with Microsoft, that knows what our brand is because we've designated for it to understand and learn the brand, the approach, certain elements that we use day to day, and be able to bring that into our assets that we're working on so that it's making it quicker for us to be able to engage. One area as well, I do love being able to record meetings with clients based on their consent, because this allows me to be able to focus more meaningfully on the conversation as opposed to having to constantly be writing the notes. And I can go back and reflect on that, make sure I have captured some instances correctly, for example.
Yeah, and I can see that. That like making sense for an organization like yours. Many people working in different divisions, and just, you can imagine the information sharing internally and then with your clients. So, like many ways where it would make sense. Something that actually, Elka, we didn't talk about in our pre-call, but I'll throw this at you. Again, you know, all these tools. We're talking about data storage and where this data is. What do organizations need to think about from a data privacy, like from a regulatory standpoint, like US versus Canada versus the EU, all these different jurisdictions approach privacy and data in different ways. And is there anything unique to Canada that we should be thinking about, again, as we're approaching all of these tools?
That's a great question. And that's one area where I think in particular Canada and US are more emerging and developing in their privacy policies and enforcement of that, as opposed to when you look overseas to the EU. They have regulations like GDPR, where there is that requirement to prove where your personal data has gone and the ability to revoke that. And so Canada is publishing more about the privacy policies and expectations and rights and responsibilities that we have. But it's more about that actually being enforced and adopted by organizations. And so with the adoption of AI, we are seeing more companies jump in and really be able to articulate their privacy policies or the AI use policies, because it goes so hand in hand. People want to know what's happening with their data. And so it's kind of compelling companies to make sure that they have those pieces very transparently shared. They want to make sure that their employees or clients are aware about the information that they have and how it can be shared. So I think that's actually a really important driver that AI is producing within, especially Canada. From a legislation perspective, there's a lot of the large leaders, technology leaders, that have actually been working directly with government to help form some of the AI policy as well. Very much being guided on the fact of responsible AI, ethical use of AI. And so we're starting to see some legislations come out. Like I think in Ontario, I believe they did start declaring from the government side which AIs they have whitelisted. And I don't necessarily want to go to approval, but they have kind of reviewed and assessed and understand the privacy implications. And so we're starting to see more of that being adopted within Canadian from a provincial perspective at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's fascinating. And I guess it would make sense. Government working with industry, as realistically, folks building these tools are the experts.
Mm-hmm.
I can get behind that. Something interesting. So you've got clients, they need to solve problems. And so one of the things that all organizations need to think about is, do we try and make these tools ourselves? Do we just buy a vendor something off the shelf? Buy versus build versus buy.
Mm-hmm.
What are the factors that organizations be thinking about when they're deciding what is something we can sort of build internally or in-house, or what's something we should purchasing a SaaS subscription, right? Curious. There's probably 4 or 5 pillars or something that you, again, others have questions to ask.
No, that's a great question as well. And a lot of that is exactly about when you're looking at your own internal resources and your internal capability, and back to what strategy do you have for AI? So when you're looking at, something, for example, off the shelf, right? You're looking at the cost and understanding everything that it includes, and that continual research and development and integration of new features. But also from a change management perspective. What's the ease of use of getting that into an organization and being able to rely on another party to be able to keep that up to date, making sure that it's secure, and it's a little bit more of that direct uplift into it. And then when you're looking, for example, for building, which we are seeing a bit of that. And a lot of that is driven from the fact that you want to configure and customize your own model. You want it to be able to speak to the brand of the organization rather than inheriting or working off of something else that may be industry specific. But there's also a lot of the understanding that there's the models, again, kind of talking to when you're assessing models, what's the price associated with that, making sure you're doing your due diligence and understanding that different models will have different price points, how often you run them to be able to develop and continue to learn from them. And the boundaries as well. So you're almost developing your own set of the boundaries from ethics and responsible AI and building that in and being accountable for that, rather than potentially inheriting that from an understanding of an existing off-the-shelf AI. And then it's also about the sustainability of that. So when you're building internally, we are starting to see some clients do this in their evolution through AI, when they're starting to get more mature in their processes and understanding it as a way to build almost product IP. So they're building something that they think is unique to them, but then realizing this might actually be something that's applicable to our market and we could sell this. So then it almost becomes an asset or an IP that becomes sellable. And so you're kind of turning that project from a cost center into a profit center. So again, it really depends on the strategy and how you see AI being able to serve the organization.
And thinking about all of what you just said around these tools, and maybe developing something internally and then licensing and selling that to inside organizations are typically responsible for AI, because it's not a vertical thing, right? It's not the head of like one department. Yeah. Theoretically, is in every department. So who owns that function? Typically, different models that you land in different places. I'm just curious what you see.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're seeing that in a couple of different ways as well. So we're seeing a surge of the new CAIO, or is kind of being able to actually have someone of an officer role that focuses on AI. And a lot of this is because it is such an integrated approach, right? You think about it's business focus. You want that business strategy. It needs to be tied to some kind of outcome or deliverable for the bottom line of the business. But then it ties into other areas like security, cybersecurity. Then you're also working with someone in your data and compliance, and like it's very multifaceted. So we're starting to see that almost become like a function, almost like operations, where that role is there to really help coordinate those different moving pieces and bring them together. Now, that's not necessarily realistic for all organizations, though. And so what we typically see and recommend and have seen as best practice is almost like a working AI council. And so what this serves as is almost like a steering committee where you're bringing in people that would have representation of what AI means. Again, bringing in folks from the business, legal, some executive, but also your operations, and then of course your IT, security, etc., so that everyone is able to meaningfully contribute as to what the impact will be across the business. And so that's probably the one from even a change management perspective or an adoption. If they're not hiring for that kind of either chief AI role or a data role, it would be probably that AI council.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Involving different people across the organization.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of There's some great questions here. I think just because there are some really good ones, we'll keep ahead 4 minutes according to our schedule, and we'll dig into them because I know some folks are hungry for very specific things. I can see them in front of me, so I'll just go from the top
Sure.
and even have some comments on some of them as well. So hopefully Elka don't mind if I jump in based off of my work as well. So the first question here is, what's the line between using AI as a tool and using AI as a crutch?
Mhm.
What are what's the line between using AI as a tool and using AI as a crutch? I actually have I have an example, but I'll see. Elka, go ahead, or I can jump in.
All good. I mean, if you want to jump in as well, I can go on.
Well, I'll make one comment. So I work in the world of media, right? And so everyone knows the New York Times, and they're letting folks in their news AI tools, but they have specific can do and you can't do. So using AI as a tool would be saying, I've written this article and asking AI to come up with some ways to read the article. So, hey, can you give me some sentences that would be telling way to share this article? That would be using AI as a tool to help with distribution. Using AI as a crutch in that situation would be AI to write the whole article, right? So doing your work, doing the whole work for them, right? And so they don't use it that way. They do their work, and then AI is just something that helps augment their work. That would be my example, and that would be the same with the Vancouver Tech Journal. We obviously we do our work. We might say, we might ask ChatGPT, like, here's the sentence we're going to use to share this on LinkedIn. How would you make this more compelling? And then it might give you a few suggestions. Be like, we think this will be more clickable. So that would just be our work. That's my example, but it's very specific to media. What about you, Elka?
Yeah, very, very similar. I mean, I like the even the term co-pilot because it's called co-pilot, not autopilot. Like it's there to be a support system. And to the question earlier about why are we seeing it now in the competitiveness? So because so many people are starting to employ the use of AI, this is where it's even more important that it is a tool, not a clutch, because out of the box, if everyone's using the same AI and asking the same questions, we're all going to get the same answers. And so if you're not injecting and bringing your unique features or assets or language or brand and thought process and knowledge to that AI or to the output, then you're not going to be competitive even with using AI. And an example, actually, I've been seeing of this is we do a lot of RFPs, like bidding on RFPs for projects. And I've been seeing more and more language in the RFPs that I'm fairly confident is being written by AI, especially in the technology world. And the challenge is that when that's happening, it's not actually telling me anything meaningful about the company and the strategy and the objectives. It's, oh, we're doing X migration, da 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 da. And here, the language, like I've actually seen 2 RFPs that were almost exactly the same, but it didn't actually tell me the drivers of outcomes that the business is looking to produce, which in some cases great if you want to keep it clean cut, no creative or no relevancy. But when you're not able to actually make it meaningful and put your own stamp on that and your own thought process, again, then we're just going to all keep sounding the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's like a key part, right? It's not about replacing humans and human ingenuity and human creativity, but like supporting it, elevating it, amplifying
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's the next question here. We'll just go right in the order that they've been submitted. It says, how can AI take the place of existing software and app usage? And so I thought about this a little bit, and I was trying to think of an answer before else. How can AI take the place of existing software and app usage? And if I may quickly, I would say it probably depends, but I'm here's Elka, if you have an immediate response to that.
Yeah, that's a good question too. And this is probably coming from, like, you see big leaders like Satya, for example, with Microsoft saying, SaaS is dead and all these products are dead because of, looking into things like agentic AI or kind of being reconciled into AI. And it really, I mean, when you think about the nature of AI, it's intended to help make your experience better when interacting with large amounts of data, information, and sources. And so when you're starting to think about it integrating into all these different points, that's where you start to think, how do we approach SaaS differently? How do we make things work together better rather than having your staff or users having to go and have these independent experiences and independent products? So that theory is that you want people to increase their productivity because they're focusing just in one area and they're able to interact and move along with their day a lot easier. So it's interesting because when you think about replacing existing software, that goes back to your understanding and architecture of the systems that you have. How are they serving you? What information or what process is it that it's serving you? And then relating that to, well, do I have this in other systems already? Or is this something that a certain type of model can help me capture maybe 2 or 3 other systems workloads and bringing it into one? So I think it's when you're thinking about software replacement or kind of the long-term strategy, again, that comes back to understanding what you have and what you need, and then what's the experience that your staff and team need to have to be able to deliver on that.
Thanks for that. Thanks for the questions so far. There's two that are similar. I'll read them both. Can you use cases? We hear a lot about AI for online/e-commerce, example, chat, but not a lot about others like manufacturers, restaurant, tourism, even ag and so that's broad. It's a broad question, but it's use cases for specific industry. And then there's another question from Terry, who's looking for specific examples of how AI is used. Are there off-the-shelf applications that can be used for specific types of functions for businesses? If so, where do you find them?
Yeah, great questions. So I think when I think of AI, a lot of people to the point is, they think about the chatbot or you think about, the image detection in your phone. But when you're looking into industry specific, that's when you want to look across the spectrum of different types of AI. So for example, in industry, we're seeing a lot of use associated with image detection. And even from a manufacturing, retail, I've also worked at energy, where this could be things from anomaly detections, right? So maybe you're looking at a manufacturing line, looking for product defaults, looking for different elementals, maybe. If you're on site, maybe from a retail or a construction perspective, taking a look at the views of your setup. I've seen it being used a lot for safety, for example, image detection, trying to look for people wearing correct PPE, for example. So I think when you're looking at the different types of AI, that's where you start to see more of those use cases emerge. Another one around, like with the chatbots, we talked a little bit about how that language is becoming more intuitive, and the ability to record transcripts, etc. So that's coming back to that customer service experience. So when you're trying to think about how to relate more to your clients and being able to get them to products and services that they need in a more timely fashion or in a more relevant way, for example. So there's a couple of different ones that we're seeing, again, thinking outside of just the traditional chatbot. What was the other ones that I think I mentioned? Tourism, I think was one, or agriculture. Agriculture would actually be one where we've seen some of that image detection being used, but also modeling. So modeling for crop predictions, trying to look for different analysis or understanding weather conditions and potential impacts. This could even go into, trying to think for restaurant.
I've got an example.
Maybe. Yeah, go for it.
Well, again, and only because, again, I write a lot about a lot of these companies. So there's a local company, Dyne, D-Y-N-E. And so the way they're leveraging AI tools is for helping restaurants predict when they'll be busy or not and adjusting prices.
Yeah.
People. right? So you're almost adjusting when your happy hour is, and then the pricing for your happy hour based off of the traffic volume that you've gotten in the past. So that's like a very specific example. It's a company that is in Vancouver. You can look them up, Dyne.
Very cool. Yeah, no, and in terms of some of the specific examples, like when I think of day-to-day business, a lot of the clients that I interact with are on Microsoft. You know, they have their Outlook, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Teams, and you're spending again up to 80% of your day there. So Microsoft has the Microsoft 365 Copilot, for example, that's leveraging those tools and assets to make your day-to-day more productive from an operations perspective. So that, for example, is a specific type of one. You know, when you're looking at the free side of things, the OpenAI Chat GPT, that's been really the pioneer that's led to a lot of the catalyst of people adopting and understand AI because they're able to consume it very easily. Again, just considering the understanding where the security implications are around that. It's open source, meaning anything you say and do in something like ChatGPT is considered open to being used and trained on. So there's a couple of the common examples. We're seeing it in like Google Chrome. They have their Gemini to kind of help with your search results from a consumer perspective. There's other ones that are more powerful for industry. So IBM has had Watson, for example. That one's been around for a while. That one's used in a lot of field operations, but that's another example of an industry-based AI.
Mm. Yeah, and I'll just, again, just since we're on this, a couple other ones that I use. So there's one called Read AI. I'm not sure if you ever use that, Elka. Very simple, right? So I have a lot of meetings with people, and Read AI will join the meeting call, right? It'll listen to everything, and then like 30 seconds later, I'll get an email saying, here are all the key points you talked about. Here's who you were talking to. Here are the action items for you. So it's like a very real practical use case for someone like me who's constantly just on calls with people and by noon, so after this, my brain will be in mush. So I'll need this for all afternoon for all of my calls, right? That's a really important one. Again, in my industry, Otter.ai, really sharp transcription service, right? So when I'm interviewing people and doing meetings like that, that's an easy one that I use a lot. And then Elka, you mentioned ChatGPT is the original. And so I actually think a lot of people think ChatGPT just writes like poetry for people, but it's far more powerful than that. And I'm sure you're aware, Elka, and I think a lot of people haven't even scratched the surface of what that tool can do, the premium version. And then another one, I don't know if you mentioned this already, Perplexity is also really in terms of for like research purposes and citing the research. And if you're doing any sort of deep research, Perplexity is another that I'd recommend it if people were curious.
Yeah, and even from business functions too, like if you use things for ticketing service, like your ServiceNow, for example, SAP, like some of the more enterprise side, but also business functions, they're coming out with their own, right? There's a lot of R&D being done into building in new AI technology into the products and services that you would use day to day.
Mm-hmm. And actually, there's another good question from Terry, and I think we have 5 minutes. And I've got an example, and Elka, I'm sure you have some examples that ties into everything we're talking about. So Terry says, I understand the need for businesses to look strategically at this, but many businesses don't even know what they don't know about AI. Many may not even know what AI could help them with. And then he says, or he or she, I don't know, aside from chatbots, can you give a few examples of how AI is being used to gain efficiencies, save money, improve services? And so I can go really quickly. So I work in media, but I've also worked in public relations at like a services firm. And the amount of time that gets saved, again, literally just from, like I say, having a meeting and then having an AI summarize what was talked about in the meeting in 30 seconds, like that saves consultant time that would be billed out to clients. So there are efficiencies immediately, and then it actually saves money or time that can be invested in other things. So I saw this firsthand in like in the services business, essentially.
Absolutely. And so the other thing that I hear a lot from clients is that, you know, well, okay, so you save 5 minutes here, 20 minutes here. What do you do at that time, right? Like that may not be a meaningful way of measuring. but what is important, right? So how are you operating? And so this is where, for example, like if you're a sales-based organization and you want to get proposals out the door quicker, but maintain quality and be able to make sure you've replicated what the client had said was important to them, right? Are you able to measure how many proposals you're getting out today and how long that takes? And then how many you're able to do in the future with the same or even whatever resources you may have. Making sure that quality and consistency is there, right? So measuring things about turnaround times. HR is actually another one that I love talking about because we're seeing more and more statistics around, when we think of Canada and a productivity crisis, getting more people into industries and getting them up to speed and avoiding things like burnout and the whole doing more with less. The cost of turnover to a business can be up to 40% of salary. And so when you're thinking about that impact on the bottom line, how can you help people to make sure they're getting up to speed efficiently, they have the information they need to be productive, but that you also have ways of supporting them in their journey, and you can continue to monitor and make sure that you're helping to avoid things like that cost of turnover. When you're thinking of things even from IT or technical side, are you understanding how much time is being invested in technical challenges you may have? Are you able to create more of a self-serve option? So, for example, I'm doing a presentation, I'll say 7 a.m., my service desk doesn't open till 8, I'm having issues with my presentation. Can I interact with a chat to help me be able to serve myself and get up to speed so that I'm not in a bind, right? So you want to think more from an outcome base, not just like, oh, I'm saving 5 minutes here or 20 minutes or half an hour, but what are you really going to reinvest that time back into doing? What is the output that is going to increase that you can measure effectively?
Yeah, I think that's critical. You nailed it there. Yeah, so you saved 20 minutes here, right? How long did that take you? Then, 6 months down the road or whatever, actually measuring what has the change been now that we're using these tools, right? I think that's really, really critical for this. Two more questions. Something we haven't talked about, but we are sort of talking about it without naming it. I would say AI process documentation. This is actually not a question that I just thought of this, right? So organizations are using these tools and we're saying, oh, here's this new process that we're implementing using something with AI. Are there any like best practices or guidelines for like, okay, now we're, like I said, I use Read AI and then we have meetings and then I get the meeting summary and then I save this in a folder somewhere. How are organizations thinking about that? Like this new AI process documentation, since the AI is doing it now.
Yes. Yeah, I think this is actually probably one of the most relevant use cases. And I think a lot about this from a field perspective, being in, you think there's standard operating procedures, but then there's also new information that maybe you're coming from different sources. And so an example I actually like to use here was about last year in the Alberta wildfires. And there was a use case where there was AI used to help people be able to respond and understand what was happening and be able to evacuate in a safe manner. I mean, when you're in emergency situations, there's heightened levels of emotions. You don't know where to go. You don't know what to look at. And so there was an example where there was an interaction to be able to created where they were able to pull from company data, understand, okay, here's procedures of how to evacuate. Okay, I've got my family in the truck. Where am I going? What are the roads? Where do I gas? Where's our muster points? And so you're able to interact with a single experience as opposed to trying to get information from all of these different sources. So to your point, William, like there's a ton of data that you own and that's very valuable. And then you can also bundle that in with other sources and that coming together and creating that experience of how you and your teams can interact with that's the value, right? Thinking about what is important for you to know to make decisions or to do more within the organization.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think we're at time, but I've got one final question, but it works in with our wrap up, which is we've talked about a lot of things, right? We've talked about tools and strategy and privacy and security and AI risks. So I want to know, what are the 4 or 5 things, right, that organizations, must get right to nail like their AI usage or to adopt AI effectively?
Yeah, I think you really want to focus again on the strategy. What is it that you're intending to do with this? Why do you even think that you need AI? And then you want to think about your people. What role will your people play? Can they bring use cases? How will they adopt and understand their role with AI? You want to think about your data. Is your data in a state where it's going to be helpful, or is it kind of redundant or outdated or not going to serve you, or maybe it has some privacy concerns? And then you really want to think technology. There is a responsibility around the technology. You're going to have vendors coming to you every day now saying, check out my new AI. We're the best. We do this. But at the end of the day, if you're sharing your corporate data, your IP, your people's information, you're responsible for that data being used. So you need to take technology into consideration. And then governance, right? This is how are you embedding this into your culture so that you're getting that ultimate value, that you're being able to measure and understand how much this is costing, but how much it's bringing back to the organization.
Wonderful. So what do we got? Strategy, people, data, the tech itself, and then governance. And with that, I think we'll wrap it up. Thanks so much, Elka. And I think we'll call back the SIP team to help close this out.
Thank you, William and Elka, for sharing all your knowledge today. Thank you for Business Examiner for sponsoring this important conversation. Thank you to our presenting sponsor, RBC, and our Catalyst sponsor, Vancity, for supporting Rising Economy 2025. This conference is also presented in partnership with Pacificam. We encourage you to head back to the Hoover platform to continue the conversation with more sessions to come throughout the day. Coming up next, crisis-proofing your business in the age of wildfires, floods, and earthquakes. Have a good day, everyone. Thanks again.